A 38-foot sloop sells at a Marina brokerage for $94,000. The seller's agent takes 6%. What neither the buyer nor the seller fully reads is the wet slip agreement transferring with the sale. A Liveaboard designation clause that reclassifies the new owner's monthly rate from $840 to $1,360. The brokerage that handled the transaction also manages the marina. The fee adjustment was never discussed across the table. The annual difference is $6,240, recurring, indexed to the Consumer Price Index, with 60 days written notice required to contest any increase and 31 days to vacate if the contest fails. Nobody lied, nobody was required to volunteer what was not asked. That $6,000 annual difference is not the number. The number is what it compounds into across a decade of ownership, before fuel, before haul-outs, before the insurance rider the same marina now requires as a condition of continued occupancy. The real cost was never on the slip sheet. It lives in the architecture underneath the transaction, in 5 interlocking mechanisms, each one built to extract value from someone who has not been made to do the arithmetic yet. This is a system. It has 5 moving parts. Every part profits from the space between what a person believes they are paying and what the structure is actually collecting. The question that governs everything that follows is this: when a person buys a vessel, chooses to live aboard it, and believes they have finally escaped the rent cycle, who actually captures the money? Is it ever the person standing on the deck believing they own something free? That question cannot be answered until the end. Before the ledger opens, consider what the dream actually looks like. Because if the desire is not understood first, the demolition means nothing. The boat is already there, in the mind, before the search begins. It sits in a slip at the end of a finger pier, and in the morning the water around it is the color of pewter going silver. The teak is dark from last night's rain. The aluminum on the mast catches the first sun before anything on shore does. A person steps aboard, and the hull moves, slightly, barely, just enough to remind every joint in the body that the ground is no longer what it was. That sensation does not exist in any apartment. It cannot be purchased in a house. It is specific to this and to nowhere else. The vocabulary that surrounds the sale is perfectly calibrated to the life being offered. The broker does not say slip, he says berth. He does not say used boat market, he says blue water capable. He does not say maintenance costs. He says the boat has good bones. The listing photographs are taken at golden hour, when the varnish glows and the water blurs at the edges, and the whole scene resembles a kind of earned freedom. Not retirement exactly, but its more interesting sibling. Independence with a waterline. And the numbers attached to this life look, at first, like an argument in favor of it. A used passage maker in the 40-foot range can be found between $70,000 and $140,000, depending on age, condition, and how recently the engine was rebuilt. A marina slip for that length runs, in most mid-tier coastal markets, somewhere between $800 and $1,400 per month on a standard lease. Compared to a 2-bedroom apartment in the same harbour city, which now clears $2,500 to $3,500 in monthly rent without a parking space, the arithmetic appears, on the surface, to favour the boat. Ownership, no landlord, an asset rather than a receipt. The dream is real. The desire is not manufactured by the industry. The industry only learned to sell what already existed in people. The water is genuinely different in the morning. The freedom is genuinely on offer. The arithmetic is for later. Later arrives with the first full year of ownership, and the ledger is not what the listing suggested. Begin with the slip itself. Across most coastal urban markets in North America, the Pacific Coast, the Gulf, the Mid-Atlantic, New England, Liveaboard marina rates run between 30% and 60% above standard slip rates for the same berth. The reasoning given by management companies is consistent. Higher water and electrical usage, additional insurance exposure, increased wear on dock infrastructure, and the regulatory cost of maintaining facilities that meet residential habitability standards. The reasoning is accurate as far as it goes. What it does not say is that the Liveaboard surcharge is also the mechanism through which marina operators segregate their most captive customer segment from their least captive one. A weekend boater can move his vessel. A liveaboard cannot move his home on 30 days' notice without a plan for where the home goes next. Apply the percentage. A base slip rate of $1,000 per month for a 40-foot berth, with a liveaboard surcharge of 40%, produces $1,400 per month or $16,800 per year. That is before electricity, which is metered separately at most modern marinas and runs. For a liveaboard using air conditioning or electric heating, between $150 and $400 per month, depending on climate and season. Annualized at the midpoint, that is $3,300 added to the slip cost. The running total for the slip and its electricity alone is now $20,100 annually. Now add the second benchmark: boat maintenance and depreciation. A fiberglass vessel between 30 and 50 feet old enough to be in the affordable purchase range, call it 15 to 30 years, requires between 1.5% and 2.5% of its purchase value per year in maintenance just to remain functional and insurable. This figure excludes improvement. It is the cost of not losing ground. On a $100,000 boat, that band is $1,500 to $2,500 annually in the optimistic scenario. It is not the optimistic scenario once the engine reaches a service interval, or the standing rigging passes its decade mark, or the anti-fouling paint needs stripping rather than recoating. A more honest range across a 5-year ownership period is 3 to 5% per year when haul-outs, bottom work and mechanical service are averaged in. On a $100,000 vessel, that is $3,000 to $5,000 per year. Call it $4,000 as a working figure. The third benchmark is insurance. A liveaboard vessel requires a policy that covers both hull and personal liability at residential levels, because the boat is simultaneously a vehicle and a dwelling. Standard liveaboard marine insurance on a vessel in the $75,000 to $150,000 range costs, in most coastal markets, between 1.5% and 3% of the insured value annually. On a $100,000 hull insured to value, that is $1,500 to $3,000 per year, add the rider that most marinas now contractually require as a condition of occupancy, typically a minimum of $300,000 in liability coverage, and the lower end of that range becomes the optimistic scenario, not the expected one. Bundle the three: slip and electricity, $20,100 annually. Maintenance averaged across the ownership period, $4,000. Insurance, $2,000. The running cost of living aboard a $100,000 boat, before food, before fuel, before any improvement to the vessel, is $26,100 per year, minimum. And that figure assumes nothing breaks expensively. What is advertised is the asset. What is owed is the subscription. The reasonable person, confronted with these numbers, begins looking for the exit. There are several doors that appear to lead out. None of them go where they are marked. The first strategy is the anchor out. If marina fees are the problem, the argument goes, leave the marina, drop a hook in a designated anchorage, live aboard legally, and eliminate the slip fee entirely. In many coastal jurisdictions, this is permitted for periods ranging from 2 weeks to indefinite, depending on local ordinance. The cost of anchoring is nominal. A mooring fee of a few $100s per year in some jurisdictions, nothing in others. On paper, the savings are substantial. In practice, the anchor-out life introduces a different set of costs that do not appear in the marina's itemized billing, but are no less real. Dinghy and outboard maintenance becomes a primary expense, because the shore is now accessed by a separate vessel. A reliable dinghy and a 4 to 6 horsepower outboard costs new between $1,200 and $2,500, and the outboard requires annual service. Shore power is eliminated, which means the boat's electrical system must be self-sufficient. Solar panels, wind generators, battery banks, and an inverter of sufficient capacity to run essential systems. A modest but functional offshore electrical system for a liveaboard costs between $3,000 and $8,000 installed. Laundry, mail, and provisioning require consistent shore trips. The administrative difficulty of maintaining a legal residential address required for employment, banking, licensing, and healthcare becomes acute in jurisdictions where anchorage is not recognized as a domicile. The savings on the slip fee are real. The replacement costs are underestimated nearly universally by people who make this calculation before they have lived it. And then there is the municipal response. In the last decade, cities from Miami to Seattle to San Diego to Vancouver have enacted, expanded, or begun enforcing anchorage time limits, liveaboard prohibitions in anchorages, and mandatory pump-out requirements that require vessels to periodically return to approved facilities. The regulatory pressure is not random. It is the result of organized lobbying by waterfront property interests and marina operators, for whom anchor-out communities represent both a competitive pricing pressure and a liability concern. The trend is toward restriction, not expansion. The anchor-out door is narrowing. The second strategy is the working waterfront. Move the boat somewhere cheaper, a commercial boatyard, a working fishing harbor, a small municipal marina far from the expensive coast. This is a real strategy, and it works, with conditions. Rates at rural or industrial marinas can run between 40% and 70% below urban resort-adjacent facilities. The savings are genuine. What changes is everything else. Employment proximity, healthcare access, social infrastructure, and the resale market for the boat itself all contract in proportion to the distance from urban centers. The liveaboard who moves to a cheaper facility often trades one financial pressure for several logistical ones and discovers that the boat's value, the number that anchors the entire ownership calculation, is harder to realize at a distance from the buyers who want it. The third strategy is the marina co-op, buying a share in a member-owned facility rather than renting from a commercial operator. This genuinely reduces the extractive dynamic. It also requires capital. Share prices at established co-ops run between $15,000 and $60,000 depending on slip size and location, and it requires that a share be available, which in high-demand harbors it often is not. The waiting list replaces the landlord. The math of the lock-in changes, the lock-in does not. This kind of analysis is published here regularly, and it is worth following for anyone who prefers arithmetic to sales language. The next section is where the strategies converge. 3 people enter this system through 3 different doors, and all 3 arrive at the same destination by different arithmetic. The first borrows 80% of the purchase price on a marine mortgage. Marine financing rates run, in most environments, between 1 and 3 percentage points above conventional home mortgage rates because the collateral depreciates and can be moved or sunk. On a $100,000 vessel at 8% over 15 years, the monthly payment is approximately $956. Over the term, the borrower repays roughly $172,000 on a $100,000 loan. The vessel, meanwhile, depreciates. Fiberglass boats in their second and third decade lose value on a curve that is not linear, but that averages, in most market conditions, between 3 and 7% annually, in the early ownership years before flattening toward a residual value that reflects the cost of scrap and component salvage more than the original purchase. By year 10, a $100,000 boat purchased on credit has cost its owner the mortgage payments, the annual slip and maintenance figure established earlier, and now sits at a market value somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000 in a benign scenario. The debt buyer entered owning something. A decade later, they have paid $250,000 in aggregate and hold an asset worth 60 cents on the purchase dollar. The second person paid cash and believed with reason that they had escaped the interest trap. The cash buyer's arithmetic differs in one column. No debt service. The slip fees, maintenance, and insurance are identical. What the cash buyer forecloses is opportunity cost rather than interest. The $100,000 not invested in a diversified index fund at a long-run average return of 6 to 8% annually does not compound, while the boat's value contracts. After a decade, the cash buyer has spent $100,000 on the purchase, $260,000 in operating costs, and holds an asset worth $60,000. The cash buyer and the debt buyer have arrived at the same harbor by different channels at nearly the same total cost. The absence of a lender removes the interest payment and installs the opportunity cost in its place. The third person chose the clever route, bought small, bought cheap, bought a vessel under 40 feet with no loan, anchored out, minimized fees, built their own systems. They saved on the slip. They paid with time, with logistical friction, with the attrition of maintaining an aging system without the infrastructure of a full-service yard nearby, and with the gradual narrowing of anchorage rights in their chosen jurisdiction. They also spent between $5,000 and $15,000 in the first 2 years, getting the vessel to a condition where it would hold insurance and pass a survey. The entry cost that the cheap purchase price obscures. Their destination is the same. The timeline differs by a few years, 3 doors, 3 strategies, 1 outcome. The vessel absorbs the money, the marina or the anchorage costs collect the subscription. The brokerage extracted its percentage at the beginning, and the owner carries all of the risk and all of the loss. The structure does not punish the borrower for borrowing or reward the cash buyer for paying cash. It is indifferent to strategy. It is designed around a different variable entirely, the fact that living on the water in a vessel creates a form of occupancy cost that cannot be reduced to zero by any means available to the person who actually lives there. Who gets paid, and in what order? The marina operator collects first, monthly, before any other claim on the owner's cash flow, because the alternative to paying is losing the place to keep the home. The insurance company collects second, because the marina requires it. The fuel supplier, the boatyard, the rigger, the engine mechanic. They collect on need, which is to say continuously. The broker was paid on day 1 and has no further obligation. The lender, if there is one, collects with interest until the loan is retired or the vessel is sold. The owner pays last, in equity, which is to say, the owner pays with the difference between what the asset cost and what it is eventually worth, a difference that, in most ownership scenarios across most market conditions, is negative. This is not a series of mistakes made by individuals who failed to read carefully enough. The contracts are in plain sight. The fee schedules are posted. The depreciation curves are documented in every marine surveyor's reference guide. The pattern is engineered by insurance requirements tied to marina occupancy agreements, by Liveaboard surcharge structures that reclassify the most captive tenants at the highest rates, by broker incentive structures that align the advisor's financial interest with the transaction rather than with the buyer's outcomes. It operates in the open, which is why it is so stable. A boat is sold as freedom and functions as a subscription to a system that owns the water underneath it. The Liveaboard, who believes they have escaped the rental economy, has changed the landlord's name. not the landlord's position. Clarity does not change the arithmetic, but it is the only tool available that the system does not sell back to you. You now know where the map leads. The map was never drawn for your benefit.